Buddy, sorry about that. Had a little bit of trouble getting a steady stream. But welcome to today's Griscom stream here at Left Reckoning. My name is David Griscom, if you're not familiar. A couple quick things to announce. If you haven't already checked it out, last weekend, Matt and I did our first of our what we're calling high-level ideas series, where we broke down Marx's Critique of the Gothic program. So that's up in audio for patrons right now. We might put it up as a video file sometime later, but not probably for a couple of months. Thanks again to all of our patrons, people who've been supporting us. All these people watching right now, definitely, like and subscribe our page on YouTube. That really is helping us early on getting the word out. So if you haven't already, definitely, do that later. But we're moving really, really well. And I can't, say anything other than I'm very thankful to all of y'all for doing that. But for people who aren't familiar, these kind of Griscom streams are a little bit more casual. I'm just going to try to take questions from the chat. I'm also going to be taking some questions from our Left Reckoning Discord. So if you're in the Discord, you can just ask a question and @mod, and those will put them up for me to be able to get to. And we also have some Patreon questions too to get into. So I promise we're going to get to that in a second. I just want to start with a quick story, something a little bit intense, and then we'll have a little bit of fun on the other side. But we have to talk about what's going on right now. If you watch, if you watch CNN or any of these mainstream news channels right now, you would be living. You would feel like you're living in a parallel universe. The way that they are talking about the failure of this government to provide stimulus for people. It's all been about this whole nonsensical, stupid at a certain point, just performance by Donald Trump, who is continuing to refuse to accept the election results. And of course, because he's a narcissist and he's an idiot, but it's just been wall-to-wall coverage of that instead of focusing on the reality that millions of people are now facing eviction in this country. There was a moment today where it was looking like there might be some movement on a new stimulus deal. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, and Kevin McCarthy had a phone call at 4 Eastern today. And it looks like there might be some movement on a stimulus, but this stimulus is not adequate at all. It does not meet the moment that we're facing right now. 16 days. That's all that is left until the federal eviction moratorium ends. And that means tens of millions of people are going to, very likely lose their homes. I mean, these are numbers that really rival the original housing crisis just, a decade ago. I mean, this is how serious this, the COVID lockdowns have been for people and how much this government has failed to provide people with the relief that they need. You can't do this to people. You can't order people to stay at home, lock down the economy, and then tell millions of people, oh yeah, also you need to fend for yourself. Right. And for those of you who might qualify for some of our programs, we're going to do a terrible job at maintaining and distributing the resources of the society to you. It's absurd and it's inhuman that we're in this kind of crisis right now, that we are literally at a moment where the health guidelines are stay at home as much as possible so that you do not spread the virus. And this system, our government and our economy are pushing people in the opposite direction, saying, we're actually going to kick you out of your home at the end of the month. I mean, can you let that sink in right now, just how absurd it is if you were trying to explain that to somebody from a different country, that we're actually in the middle, or that we're still continuing to see this crisis, that people just don't understand this is the kind of bare minimum. This isn't even what we need to do. This is the bare minimum of what you have to do if you're going to institute this kind of a lockdown. And people are struggling because you shut down the economy, which means you lose your access to income. And then you're supposed to be provided with some kind of benefits from the society. And even for people who qualify for unemployment insurance, people have not been met. I'm sure a bunch of people listening to this stream right now have experienced this. Even though you qualify for these programs, getting those programs, getting that money into your account has proved to be an almost impossible task. The numbers are really striking with this. Unemployment insurance benefits are estimated to be the failure. So people who qualify, who aren't receiving these benefits, are estimated to be 8.9 to 13.9 million people nationally who are unable to use unemployment insurance. And only approximately half of all people who qualify for unemployment are currently receiving benefits. meaning there are a lot of people being left behind. And they can't even keep people in their homes. They can't even make a decision to stand up and say, we aren't going to accept this. And we're going to make sure that people aren't facing eviction at the end of the month. Who knows? It looks like they might be able to squeeze something in to this, stimulus deal, but the Democratic Party is already accepting too many concessions on this. We're not even talking about what people need at this moment. It looks like they're actually going to drop their demand for aid to states and localities coming up in this new stimulus bill. And why is that a problem? Well, I was just going through earlier about how much the distribution of these resources, how big of a failure it's been. That's because the institutions that are supposed to be in between you and the government, your state government and your local government, these kind of community systems have been so underfunded by decades of austerity that they just can't function. They can't do the job that they're supposed to do, which would be, so even if you allocate the funds to people, people aren't getting them because the system is just dysfunctional from top to bottom. And it looks like the Democratic Party is going to cave on even that. Again, that's not even demand. That's the bare minimum of what you have to do during a crisis like this. Like, I can't believe that we're sitting here 15 days away, 16 days away from our eviction moratorium, likely looking like it might not be extended past December. And let's also not forget, this is an eviction moratorium. We're not talking about the government coming in doing what they should have done, which would be pay people's rents. This is literally just saying that you can't send in a cop to throw somebody out on the street during a COVID crisis. That's what we're arguing about. All of these people still, for the most part, are going to be responsible for paying back rent they weren't able to pay over these past few months when they were either unemployed or underemployed, or were just dealing with the horrific financial blow that COVID has meant for so many people. We need relief back rent for people. We need that to be paid. We need for people who have already paid that rent to be reimbursed as well, because what has happened is most people have been dipping into their savings, just to get by. Again, trying to follow the state health guidelines, the guidelines that are coming from the government saying this is what you need to do. People are trying to follow those and are now being told that they have to fend for themselves, and now aren't even seeing the government show up to do, again, the bare minimum. I mean, it's just like, are you kidding me? It's the least that we can do to make sure that people aren't kicked out of their homes for following the instructions of the health officials. And just, so we have to keep the pressure up on this as much as we can. I'm sorry to come in a little bit hard at the top, but it's just something that is so critical. And it's very frustrating that that's not the top news story every day, that's not the top news story. Don't get me wrong, they cover it, but it's always, it's being pushed to the bottom so that we can watch this stupid spectacle of Donald Trump versus Biden, right? I mean, it's a soap opera versus the reality of what people are facing right now. And it's infuriating. On top of that, we're seeing, huge rises in hunger. So if you're able to help out people in your community, you definitely do. There was a horrific story in the Washington Post, basically breaking down that supermarkets are now seeing a large increase in shoplifting, but it's not the kind of things that people typically shoplift. It's things like baby formula, diapers, pasta, and bread. If there is any bigger indictment on a society than people needing to steal bread to survive, I don't think that there is. That is, that's the classic, right? That's almost the trope. If you're trying to write a novel and say, this is how bad things have gone in society, that people need to steal bread to survive. We're there right now. And people need to start paying a hell of a lot more attention to that than all of this nonsensical spectacle. All right, y'all. So I had to get that off my chest. So let's get into some different stuff. So if you're in the chat, I would be looking for those questions. Please, I'm ready for those. And I know we have some already coming in the Discord and some patron questions. But maybe let's start, with the patron question. Thank you to all of our patrons out there. So these first two questions are a little bit related. So I'll do the first one and then jump into the second one. But Ishmael asks, how do you think we can effectively grow the left in Texas, specifically outside of Austin? Austin's always been more progressive than the rest of the state, and now have elected Garza as DA, Kazar. It looks like a bigger gulf between the city and the rest of Texas. Then they go on to say Jessica Cisneros was unable to win their election. Heidi Sloan lost. And yeah, they just go through a few other races there. I mean, there's a couple things to note there. I would, one, sort of push back against the framing that Austin is particularly more progressive than Dallas and Houston. If you look at the work that people are doing in Dallas and Houston, those folks are just as much leaders as the folks in Austin. But your question about Austin specifically, being seen as a progressive bastion, I think brings me to an interesting point. Yeah, Austin has a reputation of being an extremely progressive city, but what's happening there right now, right? Well, why we're looking at it as a model as a city that is doing a lot of things right, and the social movements there in particular are doing a lot of things right, is not because people were just sitting down saying like, "Oh, we live in a progressive city." They were saying, "Oh, we supposedly live in a progressive city that has this reputation, but yet, we have this massive houseless crisis. We have this massive crisis of police abusing people. We have this massive poverty crisis." The image that Austin puts out into the world is very different from what working people are experiencing in the city. And that's when, activists and community organizations step up and do that kind of real work, putting this kind of image to the mirror and saying, do you actually think that you reflect this image that you're putting out into the world? And that's been the work that people have been doing. So the reason I want to hit on that is because I think it's really important that we not think about politics in that kind of way. It's like, oh, this city's progressive, this city's not progressive. Because at the end of the day, the things that we want, right? Making sure that people are housed, making sure that people have people have Medicare for all, right? Making sure that we've pushed back and fight and tried to destroy police abuses in cities. All of those things are things that so-called, for the most part, Democrats who present themselves as progressive. Again, we're a very small group of the people who are in Congress and say that they're progressives are actually progressives. We've been through this, for the past 2 years, seeing how flimsy that name is for a lot of people, how little it means to a lot of people. So all of those so-called progressives, right, in left-leaning cities, blue states, all of those, in New York City, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in Austin, Texas, there's a fight against the political establishment there to get that work done. And it's the same fight that there is in Atlanta. It's the same fight that there is in Charleston, South Carolina. It's the same fight that there is in Chicago, right? Like the people who are against us are the same in every scenario. So the strategy, obviously pay attention to, specific aspects of, your locality and the culture and history and all that stuff. I'm not saying ignore that, right? But what I am saying is like, there is no good template. Like there is no part of the country that is like so much more historically advanced, politically advanced, that those kind of activists and strategies are operating from a completely different playbook, right? Because at the end of the day, the things that we want to get done, we get resistance from everywhere that we try to get it done. And I think starting from that kind of model, you're going to have an easier time if you are organizing, trying to organize in place. So for example, this question brought up, places outside of Texas, outside of Austin. And, I would say that I would include Dallas and Houston and San Antonio with Austin basically on that kind of level. But the real question is like, how do we get, out into rural Texas and start winning? I think that that's going to be, something that we're going to have to do a lot of work on, because this movement very much is, reflective of realities in city centers. And, that's good. I mean, that's where most people live. But we have to start building those kind of relations. And you started to see that with those progressive candidates that you brought up too in Texas who lost. The reality in Texas, and I'm not trying to make an excuse because we can't make excuses. We have to win. The reality in Texas is those districts are really well designed to prevent anybody on the Democratic Party, let alone a progressive, winning. Anybody. And they do their job, and we're going to have to work extra hard basically to be able to push that back. And that's why we can no longer accept failure from the state party in Texas in particular, but across the country, because it just gives the Republicans such an advantage to be able to gerrymander these districts. I mean, the districts that all those progressives, for the most part, you listed earlier, are running in, they look hilarious. I mean, they're a joke. And so they do their function, and we're going to have to come up with strategies that can that can overcome that. I think that's a very good challenge, and it's something that we have to do. That being said, I'm going to come back down and look at these chat questions in a second. But somebody asked another good Texas question that I think I wanted to get to. So Richard says, I know this is an old one, but how worried should the left be about Dan Crenshaw? I'm an infantry veteran, and the idea of him running for president scares the crap out of me. Can his district be reshaped? Well, let me put you at ease. Dan Crenshaw is the best that the Republican Party has for trying to do some kind of, poor man's AOC, right? Trying to be the young, youthful, interesting guy. He don't got it. I'll just tell you that right now. And I think that is best exhibited in this stupid video that he put out earlier this week. I don't know if everybody's familiar with it yet. But again, and honestly, like, screw this guy for this too. In the middle of a national pandemic, as we are fighting tooth and nail to make sure that people can be housed and protected, right? People he supposedly is representing and cares about, right? While all of this is going on, Dan Crenshaw is trying to be a B-movie action star. And he comes out with this video called Georgia Reloaded with him jumping out of planes, essentially some kind of Mission Impossible style theme. The reaction to that video was very bad from the Republican base. In fact, retired U.S. Army General Raymond Thomas, who led the Special Operations Command when Crenshaw was in the military, put out on Twitter that he thought the video was a Saturday Night Live or Comedy Central skit when he first watched it, and he called it, quote, embarrassing, and and suggested that Dan Crenshaw should be focusing a little bit more time trying to convince people on the merits of this policy rather than these kind of publicity stunts. Even more, I think, hilarious was in Military Times, which is a publication for folks in the military and veterans, and covers the military extensively. Was this line in an op-ed about Dan Crenshaw. Of note, Georgia is the second state Crenshaw is reloading after he previously reloaded Texas in September. Yes, he did. Another one of those stupid videos. Anyways, back to the text. Perhaps hitting targets the first time would eliminate the need for reloads, but alas. So I'm sorry, Dan Crenshaw is goofy. I understand how you can sort of see him and get nervous that like maybe he's going to be some kind of like, they're figuring out how to do social media. And look, he is younger than, other people in the Republican Party. Honestly, a hell of a lot younger than most people in the leadership of the Democratic Party as well. But look, he's just not in touch. He's not somebody who I think we have to really worry is going to lead some kind of youth revolt. I think that they think that they're banking on Dan Crenshaw. They want to turn him into a little bit of a political celebrity, but the fact is he just really is not. He doesn't have that kind of star power. I just really don't see it in him. So I would not be particularly worried about Dan Crenshaw any more than any of these other Republican ghouls. Like, be worried about Dan Crenshaw because he's coming for your health care. Be worried about Dan Crenshaw because he wants to turn the government into an ATM for corporations. Be worried about him for that, and be worried about him definitely because he's somebody who wants to push the United States into more imperial adventures and cause devastation around the globe. That's the kind of thing you need to be worried about with Dan Crenshaw. But I don't think that he's some kind of superstar politician that we're going to have to be worried about facing up against. Honestly, if we're going up against a goofball like Dan Crenshaw in 15, 20 years, I would say that we're probably in a good position. All right, let me see if we got any questions in here. Before I get back into some of the other ones, I know I have some in the Discord, so maybe I'll go there. All right, Discord question here coming up. Thank you so much for everyone in there. Somebody asked a good question in the Discord, said, other than overcoming a distinct lack of funding, do you have any thoughts on how to go about developing leftist think tanks to work on policy, have people ready to fill administrative openings when the time comes? Again, I think that this is something that's very important. Daniel Bessner, obviously somebody who writes about it a lot. I mean, the funding is going to be the biggest issue, the funding and then the legitimacy. We've seen, for example, Matt Brunig has been able to do a lot, just with personal fundraising and through Patreon, with being able to put out policy proposals that have gotten covered in the media, like other kind of think tanks. So like that is something that is working, but obviously, that's one person. I'm not sure if there are other people working on the People's Policy Project with him. But anyways, we're going to need a lot more money than what's coming in through that, because we're competing against basically bottomless pockets from the right wing and the center to support think tanks. I think the only way we'll be able to develop that is if we're also able to fundraise more money and bring in more money to political projects. So that means expanding organizations like the DSA to be able to have a kind of policy arm. Might be some way to develop it, but it's going to be really difficult. I don't think that there's any kind of quick fix unless a couple of y'all out there win the lottery and want to set up a couple of think tanks with your winnings. Somebody asks us another question in Discord. Are you planning to continue to update the TMBS reading list on Goodreads? Will you stand up something separate? I've been needing some literary inspiration during lockdown and just found it yesterday. Hey, that sounds like a good idea. I think Matt and I always love to be able to put up book suggestions to folks, and I'll definitely see if we can expand on that. I'm not sure if like the one that it's on Goodreads, if we put that out directly, or if that came from somebody else. But I know that was definitely a list that we've all put together of works from that Michael liked and that we all read together. So definitely want to keep this going. All right, y'all. Let me see if there's any more questions here before I get back to the Patreon. All right, keep going to the Patreon then. How much do you think Crenshaw's ad cost? Probably too much money. There's no doubt about that. All right, y'all. Somebody says, not exactly a question so much as a statement, but really enjoyed reading the Gotha program. And they suggest that maybe we could do a kind of Socialism 101. I think that's actually the idea. I think we might try to come back and do some classic Marx texts. Again, for people who aren't patrons, we were able to do a deep dive into the Gotha program, which is a really critical text, I think. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. All right, let's see. Michael says, can you break down some of the ways corporations game legislative and rulemaking processes using their vast resources to exert influence non-corporate persons have trouble mustering? I mean, the simple answer there obviously is the money. If you're able, that's why, this was a couple of years ago, everyone made a big deal about the fact that Elon Musk, was donating to both Democrats and Republicans. It's like, well, of course he was. Because that's how they do it. They buy everybody. Trump did the same thing, and they do that through the fact that they have, incredible amounts of money, and it costs a lot of money to run campaigns. So that's the first way that they do it. I would also note just like two other, ways to think about it. Last week, Matt and I talked about what's going on with Tyson, right? And, with Tyson Foods, and this disgusting fact that, members of the organization were setting up betting pools to bet on how many people in those factories would catch COVID. And what you saw afterwards was, what you saw during like the initial reaction to COVID, the complete failure of these companies to protect their employees from COVID, was a failure on the state level and on the administrative level of the government to come in and demand that Tyson change their activities. Well, one reason that happened was because those systems are extremely underfunded. So I'm not trying to dog everybody who does that kind of work. That's incredible and important work. But what you also saw in states like Georgia and in North Carolina and in Nebraska was a lot of these guys were a lot of people who basically were inspectors or people who work, in the oversight on the government side, on the oversight of these factories. They had personal farms that sold meat to Tyson, or they had all these different kind of financial relations to them too. And that's a kind of small scale relation. And that definitely happens on the congressional side too, with companies giving, favorable treatment to politicians because, they know that person will remember that favor later. and a lot of people are worried about their bottom line, especially rich people. And yeah, so that's that's another reason, another way that it works. Yeah, somebody says, what is Crenshaw's day job? Being a Trump bootlicker, essentially, and being a goofy one at that. I mean, he's not even. I mean, there's a lot of really embarrassing Trump bootlickers, but I think Dan Crenshaw, by trying to make it seem like youthful and cool and fun, is even more cringe. All right, so we got Jack says, I'd really be interested to hear a radical history of Texas at some point in the future, especially given your plans to focus more on organizing there going forward. Yeah, I think that sounds like a lot of fun. Somebody we're already talking with is Harvey K, who you can actually see in about half an hour on the TMBS channel. He's hosting a conversation with Adolf Reed, but he wants to talk about the kind of early German socialists in Texas. So I'd love to do that and obviously do a lot more of that going forward. So let me see. There's a little bit of a long one here. Yeah. So Matt basically, saying thank you for the show. I appreciate all the support here. Oh, I'd like to get your take on the issue of vaccine hoarding by wealthier nations. I mean, that's something that we're definitely going to have to, be very wary of, going forward. There's no doubt about it that the way that these countries operate, particularly the United States, is not really coming from a humanitarian or egalitarian perspective. And they'll obviously argue that the United States needs more vaccines than other countries because of our larger population, which I think is generally fair. But two, because of the increase in the spread here. I think all that we can really do is try to make sure that we're watching out for that and pushing the proper international bodies to make sure that the vaccines are distributed and you don't get hoarding by a few American or European states. So cool. Yeah. Sorry that I don't have much on that other than that. It's definitely something that, I mean, it's inhumane. That's how capitalism works, unfortunately. That's how this kind of imperial system works, unfortunately. And all right, I think so. I have another question here in the Patreon. So I'll definitely jump into that. And then if anyone else has any questions in the YouTube channel, I'll try to answer it. But then if not, I might be sort of winding things down. But this is an interesting question here. Somebody asked me, what's your read on the Movement for a People's Party? And do you see it as a viable organization going forward? Now, I know a little bit about the Movement for a People's Party. And I'll just say this. I think people going out there, before I go there, Autumn wants to know what I want for Christmas. Man, I'm really, I don't need too much, maybe a nice bottle of bourbon. I think at the end of the day, I'll be pretty happy with it. Being able to launch this show with Matt has been, pretty much all I need for right now. I'm pretty excited. But maybe a nice bottle of bourbon. Maybe I need to get my banjo fixed up too. So maybe a new banjo. That'd be awesome if Santa Claus is listening. But let me get to this Movement for a People's Party. So a lot of people send me their stuff, and I think that it's great. I mean, there's no doubt about it that one of the most difficult aspects of our politics right now is that we don't have ownership of a political party that can run and win and challenge the Democratic Party. So again, I think anybody who's trying to build that is great. I know they had an incredible conference earlier this year that had a lot of wonderful people, including Cornel West. So I think everybody who's doing what they can to be involved with that, I don't judge anybody for trying. I will say that I think that it's going to be very difficult to launch a third party in this system from the ground up. And I know that these people, have thought about it. And let me see, I think I had their strategy up a second ago, and I wanted to go through that a little bit because I have some issues. But primarily my issue is this: we're not going to have a party until we have the people. And what do I mean by that? Like, the reason that we don't have a viable third party in this country is not because we haven't come up with the correct slogan or even the organization. Like, the problem that we're facing right now is not that we don't have the proper organizations. It's that the working class is not organized. And until we start to do that work, we're not going to be able to have the party. That's going to have to come organically out of people's movements. And I know that's exactly what they're trying to do there. But I'm just saying to anybody who's sees the website and thinks, okay, we're just going to relaunch a new party with a new slogan and a new organizational structure, that's going to work. The People's Party, itself, the historical People's Party in this country, that came out of people getting together in their own communities and creating the Farmers Alliance. Then that merged with the early trade unions in the United States. Both of those were organizations that were directly focused on fighting for working people and understanding the situation that we're in. Right, and that's very critical, because that was how you started to move, especially in the case of the Farmers Alliance. People were getting screwed over by merchants, and then they started to understand, well, the reason we're getting screwed over by merchants is because the United States runs on the gold standard, which will always put us at a disadvantage at the end of the season, and will make our debts grow exponentially while we're growing crops. Once they had that kind of political awareness, they were able to build political movements with that as a demand. That tied into a lot of other demands, many of them very much anti-capitalist, and that's why that grew up into becoming the Socialist Party later. So what I mean there is what created the People's Party was actual kind of organic organization and a working class in this country becoming aware of itself as a class. And just that's, at the end of the day, until we build that, it doesn't matter how snazzy our logos are. It doesn't matter how well organized our political parties are. We have to get that kind of organic organization of people and get that jump started. That's just it at the end of the day. So I commend anybody who's trying to do that work. And I'm not saying that the Movement for People's Party isn't engaged in that work, but I just at the end of the day, that's what we have to focus on. That's something that we have to focus on, the DSA, all these organizations at the end of the day, until we get the people class, a working class that is not only, obviously already exists, but once it is aware of itself as existing, that's what we're going to need to develop. Until we have that, we're just going to be scattered, unfortunately. It's a big historical task, but you want to change the world. Do I think teachers unions have potential? Absolutely. Teachers are really, this is a question from the chat. That's exactly, those are really important members of the labor movement and also of the community. I mean, people really do love teachers. And I think it's been great how radical the teachers unions have been over the past few years. So again, that's the kind of, movement that we need to be facilitating. Also, I will just say, one thing that I did want to note, I don't agree with this strategy in the Movement for the People's Party about, let me find it, build state by state. And maybe it's just me, maybe it's part of the project of left reckoning, but I really don't like this idea that you have to only build a left party in the quote unquote most progressive parts of the country. Really, in the situation that we're in right now, as I was saying earlier, you have to have these fights in New York, you have to have these fights in Los Angeles. There's no part of this country where you don't have a machine politics that has to be overcome by organizing working people and really expanding people's understanding of what is possible, right? And I think that fixating on only making kind of socialism of movement, for example, that exists in Brooklyn or in Queens, and then we're going to ignore everything that's happening in the rest of the country, I think that will be a huge mistake. Because we are already seeing across the South, and that's why we launched this program, Left Reckoning, across the South and the Midwest, that working people are starting to develop different kind of organizations and are challenging those systems. And if we don't start building out a left that is very much of those movements and including those movements and covering those movements, we are going to fall apart. Because that is where a lot of labor militancy is developing right now. It's in the Midwest and it's in the South, and hell, it's in New York, and that's a good thing. But I really reject this kind of strategy that we're going to take a regionalist approach and we're going to say okay, we're just going to focus on the Northeast, and we're just going to focus on some bits of California. If you want to build socialism in this country, we got to be building it everywhere, because we're going to need the votes in Congress. And I think that sitting here at this moment where we are at right now in 2020, where we saw all these new people become activated across the country, by a radical vision that was put forward by Bernie Sanders that brought all of these people into this left movement, to the socialist movement, right? So we have all this momentum and all of this energy, and that momentum and energy was not limited to just small parts of the country. It was all over the United States, and we need to be building off of that. So again, that's the positive side, but the negative side is we're sitting here in 2020, and in Congress right now, they can't even prevent people from being evicted from their homes, right? We are in a position of weakness, and we need to expand and grow exponentially. And I just think giving up on certain arenas, giving up on certain regions, giving up on certain states right now is just not the strategy that we should be pursuing. We should be activating people across the country and their communities to be rising up and challenging their political systems, right? That's what we have to do. Yeah, if we're connected globally, there's no reason to only act regionally. I think that's exactly it. Erica says, except Florida, but I don't know about that. All right, y'all. Like, let me see if there was anything up. All right. Trying to see if there's any more questions, but let me tease a couple of things that we're going to be doing later this week, so I have time to log off and watch this Harvey K discussion with Adolf Reed. I'm really excited for that. Definitely, support us on Left Reckoning at patreon.com/Left Reckoning. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're really building it out. It's a difficult task, obviously. Matt and I built up the TMBS page over years. Of our life with our good friend Michael, and it's a little difficult to rebuild all of that today. So definitely, if there's anything that you can do to support that by spreading people the message about the YouTube channel, is really helpful for us as well. Anyways, fun stuff. Friday, Matt's going to do another one of his Marx and Madden streams, I believe. I think he's going to be listening to the 18th Brumaire, so that's on Twitch. Get a little bit of Lex football skills. He's training. He's worried. I'm coming for him. When I get my gaming system set up, Matt's going to be dealing with a few defeats there. So he's sweating. Let him know that I'm coming for him. But definitely check that out on Friday. Again, on Twitch, Left Reckoning. And then we're going to be doing our Thursday show this Thursday. I think we're going to be covering a little bit more in depth as to what's been going on in India. And also some really, really important struggles that are happening in Canada right now with the Indigenous movement there. So definitely keep your eye out for that. And thank everybody so much. It's been it's been a lot of fun to be on this journey with all of y'all. Continue spreading the word, and I couldn't be doing it without y'all. So solidarity. Take care, everybody.